Welcome back to the GOAT District. We were on last night, drafting an FFPC main event team. Today I have Jakob Sanderson, who I'm really happy to finally get on the GOAT District. Jacob's a really, really sharp guy. You know his work from Dynasty Tilt and also his great writing on Player Profiler. How you doing today, Jakob?
Man, I'm doing good. I'm pumped up. This is one of the most exciting days of the year. We finally get all the 53s coming in. That's going to be an absolute blast. So we get to track to find out which of our backup running back picks from round 17 and round 18 survive, which ones don't survive. It's a really, really fun time. And I mean, getting closer and closer to football season. We're well into FFPC draft season. I think I've done 3 teams so far over there. I'm doing a 4th one tomorrow night. So this is a really fun time to chat.
Awesome. Well, let's get it started.
GOAT District, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text? That trash offers the best? You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice, from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man, y'all know what to do. It's the... And I'll always be traded. And I'll always be traded. And I'll always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.
Awesome. Yeah, so we're less than 10 days out. So I'm glad I got you on here. I want to react to see your reaction to a couple of recent developments that's kind of shaking up. You know, we oftentimes we see like the back half of these drafts start to radically change this close to the season. 2 rising tight ends that we're really seeing are Brevin Jordan and Isaiah Likely. What's your reaction to these guys? Are these guys you're willing to take shots on? And how high are you willing to push him up?
Yeah, Brevin Jordan is a guy that I've been super into, even like way back in the early season. I think on Underdog right now, he's my 3rd most drafted tight end. He's in an interesting spot. I'm actually not 100% sure why he's rising. I assume it's because of the preseason usage, but
there's also some sharp, I'll say there's some very sharp money on Brevin Jordan. So I think that's done it a little bit. And I think that we also see some very sharp analysts talking about the preseason usage you're referencing. So I think we've seen a big rise.
My concern with the preseason usage stuff is that, so I was really on him early in the year because it looked like, I thought potentially he was drawing live to be number 2 on that team in targets. Really, they don't have anyone established after Brandon Cooks. I know Nico Collins got a lot of love. And then especially after the Mechie injury, it was like, okay, well, they're probably going to be running a lot more 12 personnel. That takes under target earner off the field. I still believe that. The interesting thing is that the news we mostly got in early camp was that Pharaoh Brown was potentially the quote-unquote starting tight end. And then he missed a lot of preseason with an injury. And so Brevin was running a ton of routes. Now, I actually don't care that much about the Pharaoh Brown stuff. I think Pharaoh Brown is going to play inline. And I think Brevin will be playing like the F tight end role, which is going to be the role that runs a lot of the routes. And they're going to be a 12 personnel base. That being said, I think that they'll mix in some 11 personnel. And if they're playing Brown over Jordan in 11 personnel, his route rate isn't going to approach the 80% that it's been. It's going to be more in the mid-60s. All that being said, Pharaoh Brown is not an insurmountable obstacle. If Brevin Jordan's able to play well in his role, I'm sure he can earn more 11 personnel snaps. He's the top receiving tight end on the team. And he was a really interesting prospect profile where the only thing he was really missing was the athleticism. And ultimately that matters a lot at tight end. But I still want to see that production profile, and it was exciting to see that. Isaiah Likely, someone similar to Brevin Jordan, where he had a really strong production profile coming out of college, but the athleticism didn't test particularly well. You know, both those things matter, especially tight end. The athleticism matters more than almost any other position. But I'm still always going to be production first. So both those guys are interesting. I probably prefer Brevin Jordan just based on that he has, I think, a pretty live path to be the number 2 target on the team, or maybe co-number 2 with Nico Collins. Whereas Isaiah Likely is going to be tough. He's going to need 12 personnel to get on the field. Now, they'll run that a lot, but even when on the field, he's still pretty clearly behind in the pecking order, behind Mark Andrews, of course, and Rashad Bateman. If Mark Andrews is to get hurt, then it's wheels up. Potentially we have a top 12 tight end. But for as long as they have Andrews there, I still think he's pretty limited in terms of what personnel he can get into. And so he's a little bit tougher to envision as like a tight end 1.
It's interesting. Yeah, there was a stat where no tight end who's ever had over 99 yards and a half in a preseason game has ever finished lower than tight end 20 on the year. So tight end 20 might get brushed off in some formats, but like FFPC, a little tight end 20 on your bench can be helpful at times. So he's super, super interesting. 2 wide receivers we're seeing get pushed up the board in recent drafts are Tyreek Hill. I was recently in a draft in NFFC where he went ahead of CeeDee Lamb, very close to the 1-2 turn, and Gabe Davis, who has been like a rocket ship all summer long. What is your reaction to these 2 guys? Are they players you're willing to take at ADP right now?
So Gabe, on occasion, I've taken him on one of my FFPC teams, but not at ADP. I think we got him at the 501, which was a little bit behind ADP. He's one of a lot of guys that I think is a really interesting high upside bet in the 4th round. He tends to go a little bit closer to the top of that 4th round as things have climbed up, especially on underdog. I prefer Juju and Judy in that range. That being said, I definitely want Gabe in my portfolio. He's definitely a guy that I mix in on occasion, especially if he falls a little bit. But he's kind of at the more expensive end of the tier, and he's not necessarily my favorite in the tier. But I want Gabe in my portfolio. Tyreek Hill is not a guy I'm targeting. I mean, he's a fantastic player, of course. So I certainly think he has a very legitimate ceiling that can go off. It's just the opportunity cost in that range. The wide receivers that I really prefer drafting are A.J. Brown and T. Higgins. Also, you can occasionally get Kyle Pitts to fall in that range. And then also we often look at Javonte Williams, Leonard Fournette being in that type of range as well. I prefer both those running backs. I prefer Kyle Pitts by a lot. And then I do prefer A.J. Brown and T. Higgins as well. Personally, in my ranks and my projections, I actually have Jalen Waddle slightly ahead of Tyreek Hill straight up. That's probably one of my more bold stands. So I draft a lot of Waddle at the 3-4 turn rather than Hill at the 2-3 turn. Certainly, if Hill was going where Waddle was going at the 3-4 turn, I would draft a lot of Hill. But I really do see those two as closer to interchangeable in terms of value. And even though the distance in ADP isn't that massive, the opportunity cost really is, or at least it is to me. I'm really, really into targeting A.J. Brown, T. Higgins, Kyle Pitts, Javonte Williams, Leonard Fournette, much, much more than I'm interested in targeting the folks going around Waddle, the Mike Williams, Cortland Sutton, Gabriel Davis, James Conner, Travis Etienne, those guys. I really see them as a step down altogether from that group of players going around Tyreek Hill, while I don't necessarily see Hill and Waddle in a different tier. So I'm playing the Dolphins through Waddle, really.
I love the Waddle take. I have a lot more Waddle than I do Tyreek Hill. I really like your call about how taking him in that range. I guess it's you've already seen him have 100 receptions, and I think he's got some unknown upside. And the thing that stuck out with me a little bit was Mike McDaniel, when he talked about getting Tyreek Hill, he talked about the pressure that he puts on defenses. I think that, like, stylistically, Tyreek could make the offense better, but Waddle could be the big beneficiary. So I love that you're on him, and that's a range we've seen kind of league winners come from. So that's a good one. Getting a little uglier than Gabe Davis and Tyreek Hill. Let's talk a little bit about this Chiefs backfield. It looks like Rojo is going to make the roster.
Yeah.
Is there a Chief running back that you're looking to draft right now? Do you have a preference?
Yeah, it's my preference is probably Clyde at this point. I've been drafting all of them to some degree at different parts of the season. I think that this Rojo stuff is probably the worst news for Pacheco and for McKinnon than anybody else. And what I would expect to see happen, though it's extremely fluid, so I have no idea. What I would expect to see happen is that they have the 3 running backs active on game days when everyone's healthy, being CH, Pacheco, and McKinnon. McKinnon seems to have a standalone role as the 3rd down running back, 2-minute drill running back, similar to the role that Darrell Williams played last year and McKinnon played at times. CEH is the lead back, and then Pacheco, I think, is clearly the game day backup, also because he's the kick returner. So he's going to be active on game days regardless. He's the starting kick returner for that team. I doubt that they keep Rojo active on game days if the other three are healthy. That being said, clearly, if you keep Ronald Jones, you have a plan for Ronald Jones. And so I imagine if one of those other running backs gets hurt, then Ronald Jones works his way into being active on game days. I think the issue is I'm not that concerned about it for Clyde because I think Clyde's position remains the same as long as he's healthy. If Pacheco goes down and Rojo comes up, great. If McKinnon goes down, I don't think that there's a reason to think that Pacheco or Rojo, certainly not Rojo, is any more qualified to play that third down 2-minute drill role that McKinnon is than Clyde Edwards-Helaire would. So he might be able to get more of that work on a McKinnon injury versus if Clyde goes down now, I think that, McKinnon might just stay in his exact role. Pacheco and Rojo now split the CEH early down component of the role. And then similarly, if CEH gets hurt, Pacheco might get an upgrade, but Rojo probably takes a big chunk of it versus I think his best case scenario would have been getting the full early down role in a 2-man committee with McKinnon. McKinnon's best case scenario would have been getting a piece of that role plus keeping his long down distance role. And then Rojo, I mean, it's good that he made the team, I guess, but he's still in a really uphill battle because he's probably not active on game days. His best case scenario, I think, is probably splitting an early down role with Pacheco if Clyde gets hurt. So I think really to see a massive contingent ceiling, any of the non-Clyde backs probably need 2 injuries now, it puts them in a difficult position. So I think it's a downgrade for the running back room as a whole. It's probably not a major change for Clyde, I think, because I think his role is secure as the lead early down back. And then you're hoping to see, if you're a Clyde manager, that McKinnon gets hurt or goes down at some point, and then he's able to get a decent chunk of the early down, and he's able to get the passing down work. I think that's his ceiling outcome.
Where would be a range that you'd be comfortable taking Clyde? Because I'm kind of on that train where I am not afraid to draft Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but I kind of like him more when he falls. So I'll give you like a OTC, and I know you're a Tony Pollard stan.
Yeah.
Tony Pollard or Clyde Edwards-Helaire?
In managed, I prefer Pollard. In best ball, I prefer Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Elijah Mitchell or Clyde Edwards-Helaire? Clyde? Okay.
Yeah.
Like that one's interesting. I'll give you one more. Chase Edmonds or Clyde?
I would take Clyde.
So I might go Edmonds on that one. But he's
like
kind of, it's kind of in that range where oftentimes you're seeing like the wide receivers get dried up. But I think that you might be onto something. I think it's probably Clyde. After a summer of debate, we just come back to Clyde at a discount. And even if we get like 10 usable weeks out of him, then that's a W if you're getting that in the 7th round.
Yeah, he's a guy for sure though. Like I'm more into him in best ball than on FFPC. I draft a lot of Clyde on best ball. Same with kind of all the Chiefs running backs. Like I just foresee situations where there are a lot of games where Clyde has like 45 to 55% snap shares. He's kind of a tough start, but he's going to accumulate enough points in best ball where he's going to have kind of a safe floor of around 9 to 10. And then he's going to have spike games where he punches in a couple touchdowns, where he breaks a screen pass or something like that. And he has that sort of like baked in floor plus inconsistent spike weeks. Whereas in best ball, like I prefer to go for the guys who I think in manage, I prefer to go for the guys who are more locked in starters. I don't really care that much about the floor because if you're on my bench, like having a floor of 8 points is meaningless to me, right? So like Pollard is a guy for sure where it's like, okay, either he's just going to chill on my bench until a Zeke injury, and then if Zeke gets hurt, then Pollard is an elite top 5 level start. And then, or, maybe he's able to have that role in the pass game that's been teased to the point where he's like a Kareem Hunt-esque every week starter. In best ball, I'm really, really into Clyde. And managed, I would be open to drafting him. I haven't yet. I looked at him a couple times in the mid-7th, and there was always a wide receiver that I liked more that was available. But.
Yeah, I just don't want to get shut out of Clyde in, these higher stakes formats.
Yeah.
I have a little bit of him in some early football guys drafts. But again, it's just a weird situation, and it has not been one I've been diving into, and maybe that's a mistake. Kenyon Drake to Baltimore, it sounds like it's going to happen. Would you have any interest in that? It seems like he's landing almost perfectly with the situation where Dobbins could potentially start the year on the PUP. Gus is already going to miss a month, and his competition would be Mike Davis and Tyler Beatty, who sounds like they're not really into those guys if they're bringing in Drake this late. Does they interest you at all, the double-digit rounds, if he signs with B-More?
Yeah, he would. I mean, all of it comes down to what's going to happen with Dobbins, right? Like, if Dobbins is out there, then you're looking at best, he's the RB2, for the early weeks. I don't know what's going to happen with Dobbins. I imagine we'll get more clarity on that soon. It would surprise me if he's just straight up put on PUP. I think the way that it's been taken, I think they're probably slow playing it. I'm not sure if he's out there week 1, but I would be surprised if he misses the full first 4 weeks. But it could totally happen. It seems like a very fluid injury situation. I think Drake, probably I would rather have him than Mike Davis and Tyler Beatty. But even if Dobbins was out there, it wouldn't surprise me if they're using 3 running backs. I mean, that's kind of what they did last year. They were putting this poo-poo platter together of these running backs until one emerged that was eventually Devontae Freeman. I'm not sure that they would have one emerge, immediately in this scenario. And then certainly if Dobbins is out there, Drake might still be splitting whatever's left over with Davis, with Beatty. And I think Dobbins, even if he's not out there week 1, he's going to be back soon enough in the season. And I guess my concern with Drake is you're not starting him week 1 because you have no idea how it's going to work. Even if Dobbins is out, I don't think you can start any of these Ravens running backs week 1 managed because you're just not sure how it's going to operate. And then
you got to love the matchup against the Jets. If you're running back needy,
like
that could be a beatdown game.
Yeah, that'd be a tough start for me though. I mean, how would we?
You'd have to be in a weird running back spot. You'd have to be in like a real ugly hero build or zero build to consider that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably rather just start like Amir Abdullah, to be honest.
I love that.
Talk about
Amir Abdullah then, Jacob. I'd love to hear you clarify that.
Yeah, so I mean, Abdullah looks like he's going to be playing the third down, long down distance role on Las Vegas. They're in a really positive matchup for that type of role in week 1 against the Chargers, where you're probably going to see a shootout. And so if Abdullah does indeed have that role that he's been projected for, then, I'd expect him to probably be running 15 to 20 routes, maybe catching 3-4 balls. And to me, that's like it's a decent floor of around 8 points or so that you're probably going to get from Abdullah, 6 to 8 points. It's not great, but I think the floor on Ravens running back would be 0. Even if Dobbins is out, it's just Davis, Drake, Beatty. I really don't know who's playing snaps, who's playing what roles. It would just be really sketchy to me to roll one of those guys out. And then, so let's say Dobbins is out week 1, and then we see how it works out in week 1. Drake played 50% of snaps. He's the guy until Dobbins returns. Then you get Dobbins out week 2, perhaps. Okay, then maybe you start Drake in week 2. And then, how much more time is Dobbins going to miss? It's just that's my issue with it is, I don't think you can start one in week 1. Then you need Dobbins to miss another week at least to ever start them. And I don't know, I just feel like you're going to have waiver wire ads that come off of week 1 that are potentially going to be more startable. So I'm sure in the last round, if I had to take one of Beatty, Davis, or Drake, it'd be Drake, but I'm probably not banking on any of those guys to make a major impact. I guess if Dobbins is going to miss 6 weeks or something, then sure. But I don't know. I don't think that's particularly likely.
It's really ugly. It's a choppy situation. Maybe we should just be drafting Bateman and Andrews more aggressively because they're going to have a big role week 1. Alexander Madison looks like he might get traded. Would you have any interest in, and I'm sure Madison might land in a spot where we'd be aggressively trying to get him. I think that's a possibility. But would you prefer Keenan Allen or Ty Chandler if Madison is moved?
Yeah, first of all, I don't think Madison's actually going to get traded, but I think they probably would be able to get a 5th round comp pick for him if he walks for nothing, maybe even a 4th. So you're going to need to see a team give more than that for it to actually be worth it for them to forego their backup running back. I think you'd probably need to see them get a 3rd. I don't know. Is the team going to pay a 3rd for Alexander Madison? It seems unlikely to me. So I think I'd be betting against him being traded. That being said, if he is, I prefer Ty Chandler. Keenan Allen, really fantastic athlete. And he has some excuses for his college lack of production where he did tear an Achilles. He played behind Breece Hall for 2 years. Yep. That being said, his profile looks more like a kick returner profile to me than a running back profile. He has 7 career receptions in college. He never crested over 61 carries in college. So I'm just not sure that he's much more at this point than an athlete, kind of gadget player, space player, kick return player. Ty Chandler, not the most impressive profile in the world to me either. He's a 24-year-old rookie, didn't really produce much until he transferred from Tennessee to North Carolina. But he had some utility in the pass game. I think he has around in the neighborhood of like 50 career receptions in college. And then you also have one of these season as a clear lead rusher, at least at the ACC level, where I think he had about 1,200 rushing yards that last year in North Carolina. I don't have the stats right in front of me, but we've seen him be a high volume rusher before. We haven't with Nwangwu. And so for that reason, I do prefer Chandler if Madison was to be out. And I agree with Dan. Like, if a team's going to only trade a fifth for Madison, well, they're probably going to get a fifth for Madison, letting him walk at the end of the year for nothing with a comp pick. So to me, it's like, why would you, I don't know. That just seems very lateral to me.
The timing seems odd too, to get this deep into it and move me on. It's just an interesting, fluid situation. One last recent news question: are you changing anything in your approach with Trey Lance, with Jimmy Garoppolo signing, or is it more of a Lance is going to be the same fantasy asset, but perhaps I need to roster a backup quarterback in case they make a change because of losing a game or two, or an untimely turnover?
Yeah, I have no concerns about Lance. I just don't see the being a realistic possibility that he's replaced if he's not injured. I mean, if you think about the scenarios, right? If you think about the scenarios where he gets put on the bench at any point, like it would be essentially a point where they've lost games, their season isn't so far gone that they can't make the playoffs. And then what are you trying to accomplish? Like, how short-sighted would it be where, okay, let's say that they're like, I don't know, 3-5, kind of like they were last year. And they decide we're going to go with Jimmy. He led us back from this last year. Well, to me, it's such a lose-lose scenario. Like, what's the best you can hope for at that point? That Jimmy leads you to the playoffs? Like, well, then what the hell do you do? Then it's almost like at that point, for it to work, as in you start winning games and you make the playoffs, like then it's saying, okay, moving to Jimmy is what did this. So then how do you go with Lance next year? I mean, I just don't see how you can essentially put yourself in a position where you could be perceived to have given up on a third overall pick halfway through his first year starting. So I really don't foresee a scenario where, unless he's injured, they're replacing him. And maybe there's like a scenario like Tua Fitzpatrick where there's like an in-game replacement at some point where it's like, okay, he's playing bad, we'll put in Jimmy for the second half, and then Lance starts again next week. That's like maybe possible. I don't know. I'm not adjusting my rank on Lance.
Me neither. And in fact, I think you might see a slight discount. And I think that it might also be, so for instance, I'm in a slow main event right now with Andrew Schellenberg and the Guilds, and we took Trey Lance in the 8th round. I did another one recently where we saw him fall to like the 12th round, where it's kind of funny where he'll get pushed up in terms of like when the quarterback run happens. Now you might get a slight discount on that. So I think that I'm still very aggressively drafting Trey Lance. Mm-hmm. If this news affects anything, I think, you absolutely take the discount. And he's got such a high fantasy ceiling. If this is just, it's fluff. It's a good backup quarterback on a team that thinks they can win the Super Bowl. Wanted to get your opinions. We had Dalton Cates on last week, and I talked to him about positional teammates being mispriced. We saw this last year. Deebo Samuel was going behind Brandon Ayuk. Cooper Kupp was going behind Robert Woods. We saw it in the running back ranks with Leonard Fournette being drafted behind Ronald Jones, Devin Singletary being drafted behind Zach Moss, and James Conner, of course, being drafted behind Chase Edmonds. All smashed. All were fantasy league winners. We already addressed Waddle versus Tyreek Hill. Wanted to get your quick opinions on Keenan Allen versus Mike Williams. Is there a receiver that you prefer on the Chargers at ADP?
I prefer Mike Williams, although I'm not particularly targeting either of the Chargers wide receivers. In a managed format, I guess FFPC, I probably like Keenan a little bit more. I honestly haven't given it a ton of thought because I don't draft Keenan at his ADP anyways. But in like underdog scenario, half PPR where you're looking for spike weeks, to me, it's clearly Mike Williams that I prefer straight up. I'm more likely to draft Mike Williams at cost on FFPC because sometimes he falls fully down to that 3-4 turn where I think he becomes a more attractive bet, whereas Keenan is usually going more in the early third. And again, that's just an area stacked with players I really like. Like I can often get A.J. Brown or T. Higgins even after him. I would take DJ Moore ahead of him. I would take Jalen Waddle ahead of him. I would strongly consider Cortland Sutton ahead of him. I don't particularly want to bet on older wide receivers that don't have a truly elite ceiling, because what we've seen is with wide receivers 29 and older, 28 and older even, is that when they do decline, it's very harsh and it's very sudden. Adam Harstad has one of the best articles on this, where I think it was called we are thinking about aging wrong, or we think about wide receiver aging wrong. I'm not entirely certain of the title, but essentially we're thinking about aging wrong. And he talks about how it's not actually like, when you look at an aging curve, right, that goes like this, that's an aggregation curve, which shows the sort of gradual decline in wide receiver production. But each individual wide receiver isn't actually that aggregation. Most of them, it's you're here, drop. Here, you're here, drop. But since not all are dropping at the same age, when you aggregate it and you see people sharply declining at 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, it looks like a more gradual curve than it actually is for any individual player. And I don't necessarily think that it's like, I think that Keenan Allen is going to have that this year. But Harstad's piece talks about the idea of, there's all these marbles in a bag, and each year there's slightly more black marbles that are in the bag. And if you draw a black marble, it essentially means your career is basically over as a relevant producer. And at 28, there might only be a couple. 29, there's a couple more. 30, there's a few more. 31, etc. You get more and more each year. But what we don't usually see is that, wide receivers that sharply decline then bounce back, and we don't usually necessarily see it be gradual. So I just think with Keenan, you're taking on some level of risk that one of these years, I don't think it'll be this year, but it might be this year, he's just not going to be the same player anymore. And so for that reason, like, I'm not predicting his demise, but I would break ties against him. And so for players that I think are of similar projection, I'm going to pick the younger player. And for me, that puts me more on Waddle. That puts me more on Moore. That puts me more on Sutton.
I actually had Keenan Allen as my wide receiver fade at ADP last week on our It's a Trap show with Noah Riddell and Tommy Libretti. He was almost at his career high in targets this past season. All it takes is him losing 10% of his targets. Like you said, he's a kind of a low ceiling guy. There's plenty of players I like more where he's being drafted. I'm a little more into Mike Williams than you are. I would definitely take DJ Moore ahead of him. I'd definitely take Cortland Sutton. But I think there's a scenario where he has a path to wide receiver one land on a touchdown ceiling. Cortland Sutton versus Jerry Judy.
Yeah, so this is another one where I would say earlier in the season, well, pre-Tim Patrick injury, it was clearly Sutton, based on the fact that I think Sutton was pretty much locked into full-time route share. Judy was more questionable in that area. Then immediately post-Patrick injury, I preferred Judy straight, just based on him over the last couple of years at least, and over his career, he's generally shown a higher target earning potential than Cortland Sutton has on a per route basis. His targets per route run on average are much higher than Cortland Sutton's. That being said, Cortland Sutton does have the highest target share season among them going back into 2019. I think with all of the camp reporting and stuff that Sutton's going to be the one. I give that like some credence, and especially just because it's such a fluid situation where we haven't seen either of them ever play with Russ. We haven't seen either of them ever play together when truly healthy, not coming off high ankle sprains or ACL tears. So I guess I would probably lean Sutton, I suppose, just straight up at this point in time. I'll defer to the market on that. But at cost, it's definitely Judy for me, where, he's going later, and I think that they're interchangeable. I have them ranked back to back. So I'm definitely drafting more Judy, but I wouldn't want to put myself in a position where I'm never drafting Sutton, because I do think that he's a really strong pick as well. So I'll take Sutton first because the market dictates it, even though I slightly prefer Judy. That being said, I want both, so I'm going to take both where I have to take both, if that makes some sense.
And follow-up question, I'm kind of with you. Like, I want to take shots on both of them. I kind of like taking the discount a little bit more. Does the Denver wide receiver room become suddenly more appealing to you with the lack of clarity at the tight end position? We see guys that are – Alberto is, pushed down. Dulcich has been banged up. Do you see both of them potentially paying off with very high target shares? Are you more apt to draft the Denver Broncos wide receiver now than maybe you were a month ago?
Yeah, it's a really nice spot. I mean, their prices just haven't really adjusted, I think, for the Patrick news. And again, I don't think that the Patrick news actually means a ton for Cortland Sutton, because I think Cortland Sutton is going to run a full route share anyhow. And then really what's happening is, like, instead of Tim Patrick running 100% of the routes beside him, or looking at around 100%, probably around 80% of the routes beside him. Now that's more routes for Judy. He's a better target earner than Patrick. It's more routes for Hamler, who I think at least has a higher target earning ceiling than Patrick. And so, I think it's probably a net neutral mostly for Cortland Sutton. For Judy, it's a big positive. He gets more routes. For Hamler, it's a massive positive, because now he walks into pretty clearly a starting role in the team as the wide receiver 3. And then, if what we're seeing in preseason is to be believed at all, and they're actually going to allot significant snaps to these blocking tight ends and run like some 12 personnel sets with guys like Eric Saubert and Andrew Beck, like, that's a massive boon for these wide receivers, because, if you put, I think it was Hayden Winks had an article about yards per route run by formation, and how teams, with 12 personnel base packages like the Titans a couple of years ago had this really high yards per route run for their receivers, because they're not competing against anyone materially for targets, right? It was pretty much just Corey Davis and AJ Brown running routes against each other. There was nobody else really to deal with, because it was like guys like Jeff Swaim and Anthony Ferkser who weren't real factors. If Beck and Saubert are going to play snaps on passing downs, that's huge news for Sutton and Judy, because those guys just aren't going to ever earn targets when they're out there. If it's going to be eventually Albert O and Greg Dulcich mixing in, and one of them's on the field, in 11 personnel on every snap, that's a more legitimate option. But I would say overall, we've seen really positive news on them. I think that the nice thing now too is, like, I was a little bit worried about how they were going to rotate routes, because you had Sutton, you had Patrick, you had Hamler, you had Judy, 4 receivers are probably at least worthy of some routes. Now you're really back down to just 3. And so I think it's pretty clearly Sutton, Judy, 2 wide receiver sets. Hamler comes in 3 wide receiver sets. So yeah, big fan of all the Broncos right now at cost. I think they're a really strong bet.
And we've seen Russ, produce 2 wide receivers, top 24 multiple times. And we saw last year and the year before the target shares for DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett be so consolidated. I think it'd be a very similar situation in a faster paced offense. So I'm into it. 2 running back battles in terms of ADP. Tony Pollard and Zeke are closer than they've ever been. A lot of times we see Zeke lately in the 5th round, early 5th, late 4th sometimes. And it seems like Pollard is locked into the late 6th, occasionally dips into the early 7th. Who do you prefer at ADP in a managed league like an FFPC main event or football guys?
I'm just not drafting Zeke. I understand that he's probably not actually a very bad bet to hit his ADP. I think he's probably honestly a decent bet if he stays healthy. But what is realistically the ceiling for him? I understand that he's had a big ceiling in the past, but he's been losing a ton of work to Pollard over the last couple of years. He's not an efficient player anymore, so it's highly unlikely that we're going to see him massively outproduce his expected fantasy points. I think you're banking on a bunch of touchdowns to sort of climb his way to 15, 16 fantasy points per game. That would be fine. It would be a fine finish. Certainly if he just reproduced last year's season, but had it more like equitably balanced over the course of the season, that would not be a bad result for a 4th round pick. But you're taking on all of that injury risk whenever you're taking a running back in the early rounds. I at least want to have a major payoff at my ceiling. And I would just way rather be stacking wide receivers in round 3, round 4, round 5, rather than messing around with Ezekiel Elliott, who I really don't see as a strong ceiling. He fell all the way to the 504 in my last FFPC draft, and we didn't even have a running back yet. We still did not take Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah,
we took Chris Godwin in that spot.
We passed up on him last night too. He's a compiler at this point in his career, and he's shown decline for 2 years. And now we have offensive line concerns.
Right.
Pollard has the receiving upside. Pollard has the juice on outside runs, and Pollard might be used in the slot. I'm into Pollard. I wish I had more Pollard, and I think there's a scenario where he dusts Zeke this year completely if Zeke starts declining, mid-year. So I'm definitely with you on team no Zeke. If he falls into the 6th in like an NFFC league, and I'm really, really hurting at running back, I really hope I don't fall in that grenade, but that would be an interesting one. How about a fun one? Aaron Jones, who's pretty much locked into, we occasionally see him in the beginning of the third, but let's call him a late second rounder.
Yeah.
And A.J. Dillon, who we took last night in the fifth, he's going somewhere in the fifth or sixth round every draft. Do you have a preference for Green Bay running back right now, or is it a none?
I don't take a ton of either just because the prices are so freaking high, but it really does irk me because I want to be attached to this backfield. I think that there's massive contingent upside. I believe strongly in both the talents. And like, if one of these guys gets hurt, the other one I think has the potential to really, really be a smash play. You know, if Aaron Jones was out for the season right now, AJ Dillon's probably a 1-2 turn pick. If AJ Dillon was out for the season right now, Aaron Jones is probably a top 6 pick. So I don't want to just forego this backfield, but I really have to be active about when I mix them in because I don't think that either is a particularly strong bet at cost while the other is healthy. I view Aaron Jones pretty similar to Javonte Williams, where I think it's a really strong talent bet and there's a strong contingent bet, but at his median projection, he's just unlikely to beat his cost. I prefer Javonte straight up because I think there's a much better chance that Melvin Gordon just gets marginalized in this offense than A.J. Dillon. A.J. Dillon's a young ascending player. Melvin Gordon is a 29-year-old. They were pretty content not bringing back to their roster until he wound up languishing in free agency. So it's hard for me to draft much Jones. I want to mix him in if I can. I certainly have mixed him in more in best ball. I'm not sure if I'm going to get a managed share. I do think that with A.J. Dillon, you know, the nice thing that he has going for him is sometimes he's there in the sixth after all the players that I want are gone. Like if Elijah Moore often goes in the early sixth, once Elijah Moore's off the board, there's like no wide receivers that I want to draft for a while. Like there's just a lot of guys to me that are the same. That kind of tier of like Cooper, Thielen, Lazard are just guys I don't really want to take in any draft. And then, you know, if I look past them, I'm kind of reaching for my favorite of like Ayuk, London, Devonta Smith, Kadarius Toney, you know, so I'd rather get those guys at their ADP, not reach way ahead. If I ever get a spot like that where I can get AJ Dillon in the early sixth, right in that kind of wide receiver dead zone, that's where I'd like to get him. But sometimes, I mean, I've seen him go like as high as the early fifth, and it's like, man, that is really, really expensive for a guy, you know, that's going where it's like, okay, I can get, you know, Chris Godwin here. I can get potentially even Amon-Ra St. Brown here. I can get Rashad Bateman here. I'm not taking Dillon over those guys.
So it's an opportunity cost thing for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds like an opportunity cost with both guys. I'm team Dillon. I understand the Aaron Jones is going to be a Kamara narrative, but he's never had more than 68 career targets in his career. And I think we're seeing Dillon as an ascending guy. And if it's more of a 50-50 split, I'll take Dillon because I think he's got a higher receiving upside than some people think. That was really good getting your opinions on these guys at cost. Remind everyone where they can find your rankings, Jacob.
Yeah, you can find my ranks, which are set to FFPC's format. Those are all going to be either in the Full Tilt Discord, which is free to enter, or they're in the Bulletproof Discord, where you can find all my content as well as so many other great analysts in the Bulletproof Discord. And you can find my redraft tiers and ranks. I have them split up into, essentially I have ranks. I also have them split up into 4 tiers, which is basically players who are what I consider the breakout archetype. I define that in my ranking sheet. Players who are not, and then within that, those ones who I think their cost is palatable in terms of their opportunity cost, and those that aren't. And then I sort of break that up into 4 and identify who my centerpiece players are. So if you want to check those out, make sure to check that out in the Full Tilt Discord or in the Bulletproof Discord.
Yeah, and anybody listening to this, here's how sharp Jacob is. Definitely check out his rankings. I think they'd be beneficial to anybody drafting up into the season. I'm going to quickly add our draft board from last night. Can you see this well, Jacob?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I want to talk to you about trying to identify the very best picks. A lot of times we see the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th round, if we want to push it, produce guys that absolutely crush at ADP, and they can be the difference between winning and losing these high-stakes formats. We can basically start with Lazard. And we are, by the way, we're team 4. So if you want to find the best looking team on the board, it's easy. We're team 4. And we did go AJ Dillon early, but we were unbelievably loaded at wide receiver with Cooper Kupp, Michael Pittman, T. Higgins, Hollywood Brown start. So Dillon made some sense. We took him right ahead of Zeke. I'm really glad I didn't take Zeke after you eviscerated him to have to show you this board and ruin your morning. So maybe we'll start with the 7th round. We see Alan Lazard to start the 7th. Then we see Mitchell and CEH, followed up by our pick of Brandon Ayuk,
Nice.
and then followed up by a falling Cam Akers. Starting with the first half of that 7th round, is there anybody in that 7th round that really stands out to you? Drake London.
I'm really stunned that you didn't pull the trigger on Cam Akers in the 0 RB build in the 7th. That's honestly pretty. That's a lot of willpower. You must be really, really out on Akers. I mean, I've been drafting a lot more Henderson than Akers, and I see you ended up adding Henderson on that team.
And we also added Kyron. We also added Kyron Williams as an endgame guy.
Interesting.
With the free look, I think there's a chance that Cam Akers falls, and you're going to have a chance to get him pretty late in these late drafts.
Later in the 7th? That's pretty late.
I think there's a chance
Didn't he open up in like the 3rd?
Yes, and we've seen Cam Akers. So we do an early draft, ridiculously early, and he was at the 1-2 turn, and then he's fallen and fallen and fallen. I think that for us, we wanted to build on our strength, and we liked Ayuk or Drake London. So we really had a Drake London versus Ayuk argument.
Okay.
More so than Akers after using that AJ Dillon pick.
So what about this? If you could reverse it, would you prefer to have AJ Dillon and Ayuk or Cam Akers and Chris Godwin?
I have big reservations about Akers. I think that.
Okay.
So for me, I kind of prefer it. I see your argument with Godwin.
I prefer Akers to Dillon straight up, to be fair.
Yes, I'm Dillon. I'm Team Dillon smashing at ADP right now, and I'm Akers disappointing. And I see Darrell Henderson as the player you want to draft in that backfield because I think that he's got a chance at a weekly receiving floor. And then if Akers misses any time, I think that Henderson is going to be very useful, like top 15 every week. I don't see Akers as like a top 15 play at running back with Henderson this year. I think it's going to be more of a split. And I know McVay did not do that last year, but I think that's kind of the way that it's headed split-wise.
So I agree with like the Henderson take. He's one of my most drafted players. I just took him in my last FFPC draft, I think in the 10th. So even earlier than you did. Where I would, I guess, push back is so Akers, like to me, and I have Akers. I have reservations about Akers, absolutely. Like I have injury concerns with him. I like Henderson more at cost generally, but by round 7, I mean, we kind of play the other way around. If Henderson gets hurt, then what's Akers' upside? Like to me, AJ Dillon, like if Akers and Dillon, if all of Jones, Dillon, Akers, and Henderson are all healthy, I would be taking Akers to be outscoring Dillon. And then, sure, I do think Dillon with Jones out is probably a better bet than Akers with Henderson out. But I do think we have to at least bake in, with some of these fallers, what if the other guy's falling too? So I'm more Team Henderson at cost generally. But, man, Akers in the 7th, I don't think I would be able to pass that up. I would be smashing Akers in the 7th personally. I just think that's like there's still an upside scenario where we just see what people were drafting him in the 3rd round for, a while ago, and that Akers in the 7th ends up looking really, really attractive. Again, I don't have much Akers, so I guess the idea of like drafting someone that I haven't drafted much of at a much lower cost is pretty attractive to me. But that'd probably be where I'd go. But it's interesting with Henderson. I will say I like the pick that you made for sure. I like Brandon Ayuk. My preferred option there probably is Drake London and Devonta Smith. I honestly, I do like them a little bit more than Brandon Ayuk. But I like Ayuk too. I see that as a pretty close tier of 3. I guess my reason for liking London slightly more is just the target path is really open for him, where I think they're probably going to pass more as an offense than San Francisco, based mostly on game script. And then you have London, I think, is pretty clearly one of the top 2 targets. Ayuk's fighting with 2 other really strong players. And then Smith, I just want to be betting on the year 2 profiles. So I understand it's pretty congested with Smith, with A.J. Brown and Goddard, not dissimilarly to Ayuk. But with both players being in fairly congested situations target-wise, personally, I prefer to bet on the year 2 profile than the year 3 profile. So Smith is probably my favorite pick in that round. But I really think that Ayuk is also a really strong pick, and London. And I prefer all 3 of those versus I think all the running backs taken that round, probably except for Cam Akers, who I think I have some residual market respect for, I suppose.
So I'll say this: Ayuk, London, and Smith. Pretty much every draft I do, I walk away with one of them. I like them all there. They're very attractive at cost. You mentioned not too much into the running backs behind them. How about Amari Cooper or Kadarius Toney? You could be very short with this one. Do either one of them are either one of them very appealing to you at the end of the 7th round as potentially guys that can elevate a team, or is Cooper more of a purgatory guy at this point?
Love Toney and managed because I think we're going to know really quick what he is. He's either going to be an every week start or he's going to be like potentially a cut. If he's playing 100% of the snaps, if he's playing inside and outside and he's getting high target volume like he was when he was playing full time last year, then he's, probably going to be potentially a top 24 wide receiver. And then, his downside risk is he's going to be hurt all the time. He's going to be a part-time player. He's not actually any good. I like players that we're going to find out about right away. So it's hard for me if I was going like with a more running back heavy open, which I don't normally do. But if I was, Toney's a tougher pick there because you're really going to need him to be in your lineup. But often where he's going in round 7, round 8, I'm able to get him as my 5th or 6th wide receiver. And I think that's perfect for him because you're going to know right away, where he slots in your lineup. Cooper, to me, is kind of just more of a best ball play because I think he's going to be in a really anemic offense. He's going to be a hard guy to trust week to week, but he's going to have that stable role. He's going to have spike weeks. I prefer him in best ball. He won't be on any of my managed teams.
Going into the 8th round, we can ignore Jalen Hurts and Joe Burrow. Is there anybody really standing out to you as a potential league winner? And I definitely want to get your thoughts on Chris Olave. But you can kind of pick and choose the guys you want to talk about here in this 8th round.
Yeah, I mean, Hopkins is interesting and managed. It's interesting that he goes in the 8th there. He often goes in the 7th in best ball. He's a way better pick and managed than best ball.
I agree on that.
Sit on your bench for 6 weeks, versus eating up a wide receiver spot in your lineup. So Hopkins is interesting there. Not a guy that I draft a lot of, but I think that's an interesting pick. Sky Moore is kind of similar bet to Hopkins, honestly, where, I don't think we're going to see a lot from him early in the season, but I think he's going to get really interesting potentially as the season goes on, and the ceiling by the end of the season is really, really high. That's a tough spot for wide receivers. Like once that Ayuk, London, Smith trio comes off the board, it's really hard to get super excited about any wide receiver as a season-long starter. I think you're looking at rookies that have upside at the end of the season, but probably tough to start early in the season. And then you have some guys that I'm just not excited about drafting, like a Robert Woods and a Tyler Lockett, who I think, again, are pretty boring. To me, more best ball picks than managed picks.
And they could be dust. They could be dust also.
When I think maybe I'm not explaining this well. When I say more best ball picks than managed, like a lot of people think of best ball picks as like a Marquez Valdez-Scantling, where it's like, oh, we need this big play upside. Like I think Robert Woods is more a best ball pick, because in best ball, like guys that have consistent roles every single week, like that has value. Whereas in managed, like what is the upside you're hoping for Robert Woods? Like if someone's upside scenario is closer to wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, or closer to RB2 rather than RB1, they're just not that valuable in a best ball format. So like running backs, like a Josh Jacobs, like a David Montgomery, wide receivers, like a Robert Woods, like a Tyler Lockett, like those are flex players, right? You're going to be able to get those guys off of waivers when you have good fortune. And when you think about how to actually win these massive tournaments, you're going to need to get lucky. So you have to build under the assumption that some of your late round picks are going to get lucky, either with injuries or with roles. Either you're going to get lucky off waivers, and you have to build the best possible roster around them. So I would way rather take a big cut at a DeAndre Hopkins or a Sky Moore or a Kadarius Toney, where it's like this guy, either is going to be useless for me early in the season, but they might have a ceiling late, or this guy might be really good, or they might just be totally useless. Then like take like a total flex player, like a Tyler Lockett or an Amari Cooper. You mentioned Chris Olave. He's probably the rookie wide receiver that I draft probably the least of this top tier. I don't dislike him. I think he's a fine prospect. I don't think he's as good of a prospect as Garrett Wilson and as good of a prospect as Treylon Burks. And he now goes beneath them. I guess that he's more likely to be a week 1 starter, I suppose. But he's still competing for targets there with Michael Thomas, with Jarvis Landry, with Alvin Kamara. I would personally rather take the upside swing on Burks, on Wilson, who I think are stronger prospects, and probably drawing higher once they do get full-time roles in their team's pecking order. And Olave goes ahead of both quite frequently. So I'm not targeting Olave. All these running backs in this round are absolutely pretty rough to me. None that I get particularly excited about drafting. I mean, Antonio Gibson now with the Brian Robinson news becomes a lot more attractive for sure. He would have been a guy that I would not have wanted to draft even in the 8th, like a couple days ago, but certainly now I see the appeal.
I like your call on Sky Moore and DeAndre Hopkins. I think structurally, when you're able to carry those guys, you need to have a good wide receiver start and potentially a bridge. Dan Williamson and I have a Football Guys slow where we took Hopkins and then we followed up with Rondell Moore. So
Nice.
We're hoping that we get a nice bridge to Hopkins. So in this round, it seems like there's no one that your potential league winners would be Moore or Hopkins if there is one.
All the guys that I like were drafted in the 9th.
Okay, so let's get to it. Get to it. 9th round, we start to see a lot of the true values get sapped up in this round. Go ahead and talk. Who are your favorite picks in this round?
So 3 of them for sure. So Rachaad White, Melvin Gordon, Treylon Burks are all 3 of my favorite picks at cost right now. I understand why Burks has been falling, but I mean, he started the game with Robert Woods in the last preseason game. He scored a touchdown. He played well. I understand Nick Westbrook-Akine wasn't there, but he's.
Are we really concerned about Nick? I mean, I get it. And it's such a joke. Vrabel said he cut off his manhood to win a Super Bowl. I think he can get over it and play Treylon Burks. I think
exactly. So, I don't think he's nearly as buried as it's been made out to be. It's so weird how everybody's reacted so much to Treylon Burks. I mean, Garrett Wilson's been playing with backups, too. I don't think anyone expects him to actually stay behind Braxton Berrios the whole season. And I don't know why we're more concerned about Burks staying behind Nick Westbrook-Akine the whole season. So, I think Burks is in a really strong position. He's, of the rookie wide receivers, he's probably the best bet to be the lead target earner on their team, and he has a really strong profile. So I love getting Burks there a ton. And then Rachaad White is probably him and Darrell Henderson. I mean, I can't believe Henderson lasted all the way to the 11th round. That's really phenomenal value. White and Henderson are probably my 2 favorite 0 RB running back picks right now because I think that each has upside to have a standalone role. I'm sure that Leonard Fournette will be getting the high value touches, but we've seen that Tom Brady just throws to running backs at such a high rate that even if Rachaad White is only going in for 30-40% of the snaps and they're all between the 20s, you can still rack up 4 or 5 catches on those snaps in certain games. And so I don't think Rachaad White is as dead for a standalone role as potentially people foresee. And Darrell Henderson, as we just mentioned, similar. So I won't recap him. And then with White, I mean, he has honestly, his contingent value might be higher than any running back not named Tony Pollard or A.J. Dillon. With how much the Bucs throw to running backs, how many touchdown opportunities they offer the running backs. He's a guy that I just want on every single team. I would even take him as high as the 8th round if I had to. I was able to get him in the 9th, the last draft that we did. I think White is a really, really big smash play, especially if you're doing any form of 0 RB or hero RB, or even just you've taken 2 early running backs and then none until RB3, like they did. I actually really like that. 17. I think White is just a really, really strong bet to make in these kind of later rounds where you're not necessarily drafting for week 1 production and you have so much contingent upside. And then Melvin Gordon is boring, but I also like him for similar reasons that I like Henderson and White, where he offers potentially some standalone value and then he offers a ton of contingent value. And those are my favorite bets to make in this 0 RB range is who are the guys that potentially we could start at RB2 in a pinch, without anything good happening, but then also have top 12 running back in the range of outcomes. And that's where I see that guys like White and Henderson and Gordon kind of separate from guys like a Michael Carter or a Cordarrelle Patterson or Rashad Penny, where I don't necessarily see that those guys have true top 10 running back in their range of outcomes, either based on their offense or based on how they get used, based on their pass game skill set or whatever the factor is. So that's why I really find myself attracted to White and Gordon and Henderson.
I have a ton of White. In a vacuum, I'm White ahead of Penny. But for our build, the potential week 1 usage was something we wanted to buy into. But I've been drafting an absolute ton of White, and I need to get a little more Melvin Gordon. Without going into as much detail, is there a 10th round selection that you really, really like, or a guy that stands out that could beat his ADP quite easily in an impactful way?
Well, I like both the tight ends taken in that round, Kmet and Freiermuth. Those are probably my favorite tight end selections at value. Those two, maybe Evan Ingram and David Njoku late. I think those are probably my 4 favorite tight end selections after the top 5. I really don't think that there's that much of a difference between, Dalton Schultz. It's unbelievable whenever I see Dalton Schultz go ahead of Kittle and Waller, by the way. That is unfathomable.
It's insane. And it's also insane to see him in the 4th round. in my opinion, in general. It's like,
oh, sorry, you didn't go ahead of Kittle and Waller in this one. I misread the board, but still, even going in the 4th round at all, I think is really, really crazy. The last draft I did, he went at the 3-6.
It's insane.
And Waller and Kittle went at the 4-5 turn. They went to the same guy. The one team double tapped them. And so the guy could have drafted Kittle or Waller in the middle of the 4th, but he drafted Schultz in the 3rd. It was bonkers to me. Anyway, I don't think that Freiermuth and Kmet are that far behind Schultz, Goddard, and Hawkinson, and they come at so much lower of an opportunity cost. I mean, look at the wide receivers going around those 3. Hawkinson actually falls to a decent spot here, but like if you look at, it's like Elijah Moore is going around there, J.K. Dobbins is going around there, Chris Godwin is going around there, DK Metcalf, Juju. I mean, they're kind of all going in this range of these other 3, and you're getting Freiermuth, you're getting Kmet around, a bunch of rookies, guys like Josh Palmer. Most of the high-value contingent running backs are off the board by that point. Really see those as much better bets to make than any of those top 3, or even Zach Ertz and Dawson Knox, who go at a more reasonable price here. But I've seen those 2 go in the 6th round before as well, Ertz and Knox. So I think those are really nice bets. Freiermuth, Kmet. I like Dotson as well. He's a rookie wide receiver who's probably starting week 1, and the market doesn't seem to be as in on. So I think he's one of the better value rookie wide receivers.
Yeah, Cole Kmet is discount Dalton Schultz. He's got a similar situation in terms of targets, target share, and you can get him in this one, 6+ rounds later. Before we get your guys for the season, I want to bring up one question in the chat from 1912 Fantasy. What is your take on Dameon Pierce?
Don't draft him in the 5th round, you crazy people.
Where would you be comfortable drafting him?
I mean, I'm never going to get him where I'd be comfortable drafting him. I'm out on him the same reason that I'm out on Penny. I see him as an early down running back on a team that won't do a lot of early down running because their team is terrible. So, like, a loss amidst all the preseason hype was that Rex Burkhead still played in every long down and distance situation. He was still coming in for the 3rd downs. He's still going to play the 2-minute drill. Like, I don't know. I just think in the first couple of weeks, we're going to see that Pierce, the starting running back, people are going to get really excited, and they're going to see that means he's going to have 11 carries for 46 yards and 1 catch for 8 yards and no touchdowns because they're going to get the doors beat off them every week. So I don't understand the Pierce thing. I mean, between the 2, of course, I would way rather have Penny in the 9th than Pierce in the 5th. I think they should go back to back, like in the 9th, 10th area where, like, sure, I get it in best ball again, but like in a managed league, when are you ever going to be confident the Texans are going to have positive game script enough to where Dameon Pierce is going to be a good start? Like, I'm sure he'll have games where, and I'm sure Penny will have games. I'm sure that these guys will have games where they actually do win and they have 20 carries for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like, I'm sure Pierce will have a couple of those, but I just think they're going to be really few and far between. I don't even want to draft Nick Chubb at his cost, right? Like, I don't want to draft early down runners on bad teams. I barely want to draft early down rushers only on good teams. I really don't want to do it on bad teams, and I really don't want to do it in the 5th freaking round. I would not be comfortable taking Pierce like until like the 8th or the 9th. I think it's a really bad pick.
In a home league, for instance, an 8th or 9th Pierce, you'd be up for.
I'd be up for, but my home league dynasty rookie draft just happened last weekend live, and someone took Pierce at the 103. So I think the home leagues are also into Dameon Pierce season.
May as well just send Jacob some money right now, fellas. I want to. We're reaching an hour. Give us your guys, your favorite players to draft at quarterback, running back, tight end, wide receiver. You can choose to go with early round guys. You can choose to go with late round guys. Your favorite players to draft at each position.
Yeah, quarterback, it's not even on purpose, but I've drafted this guy in all 3 of my FFPC so far. It's Kyler Murray. He tends to seemingly go – he went pretty early in this last league, but I got him as late as the 809 in my last league. And I consistently see him go as the 6th quarterback off the board now. It seems like he's been jumped by Jalen Hurts. I still think he has about as good a shot to finish as QB1 as any of that top 6.
He's my most owned QB as well. It's gross how much Kyler I have. It's awesome value.
Yeah, it's just I really do see those top 6 as fairly interchangeable, and he's so often the last one to go. You also have 3 stacking options often available after drafting him in Hopkins, Rondale, and Ertz, which gives you some flexibility. Plus, you could get Marquise Brown earlier. I really like Kyler Murray. I love his weaponry this year. He has the profile that we want of a fantasy quarterback, and I think people are mostly fading him, I guess, because of the weird contract stuff. But I don't know. I don't think that he's that much different than really any of those top 6. So Kyler, I mean, a tight end, my ideal scenario is that I just draft Kyle Pitts. But if I can't draft Kyle Pitts, then probably my favorite of the late round tight ends is David Njoku right now. He's been running a route on over 80% of the dropbacks in the preseason. That's a really, really strong role for him. And if he's able to carry that forward, he's a guy that I think will be a potential like lower ceiling but higher floor guy throughout the Brissett period. And then if you're able to make the sprint, and you have with Sean Watson coming back, he might have a really high ceiling towards the end in that final sprint. So Njoku's a guy I like. Also, Evan Ingram is the other late round tight end that I really like. Wide receiver. My favorite pick right now is probably Juju Smith-Schuster around the 4-5 turn. I think that he's been overrated as a player for most of his career, and I think now he's almost underrated, but he can do certain things. He's a really strong after the catch player. He's a strong player against zone. He's not able to beat press man coverage on the outside. He won't be asked to do that. He's going to be, and I think kind of a similar role almost to how Chris Godwin has been used in a fantasy sense, where he gets to play a lot from the slot. He gets a lot of short area targets, and he gets to be sort of that 20% target share, 20% air yards guy, but in an aggressively pass first offense. It's going to be super, super efficient, and it's going to score a bunch of passing touchdowns. And we've seen with Godwin that you can parlay that kind of 20% target share, 20% air yard share role into really, really high-end wide receiver one outcomes when you're in the right environment. I think Juju's in the right environment, and he's my favorite of that round 4 wide receiver tier. That just leaves running back. My favorite running back pick I talked about, Rachaad White right now would be my favorite running back pick. It'd be a coin flip between him and Darrell Henderson Jr. But those are the two guys that I think have youth on their side. They have pass catching ability. They have standalone value potentially. At least they have odds of that. And then you also have this massive contingent upside. And so Rachaad White, I think, in the case of Leonard Fournette injury, if Rachaad White is in fact clearly the 2, and I mean, by all accounts, it seems like he's already potentially passed up Keyshawn Vaughn. Giovanni Bernard is Giovanni Bernard. So if he's able to get that number 2 role and Fournette gets hurt, I mean, he potentially is providing like first, second round level value. So yeah, Rachaad White would be my favorite running back pick.
We have one question we've asked every single guest since rookie drafts ended. Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and Cooper Kupp are going off as 1, 2, 3 in terms of the wide receiver ADP in pretty much every format. If you had to pick a wide receiver outside of those 3 to finish as wide receiver 1 overall, who would it be?
That's an interesting one. I will say A.J. Brown. I think that when you look at most of the per route type metrics, targets per route run, yards per route run, you'll often see that A.J. Brown is mixing in with the likes of Cooper Kupp and Justin Jefferson and Devontae Adams and all these types of metrics over the last 3 years. It's going to need him to stay healthy, and it's going to need the Eagles to pass more than is being expected of them. But he has the type of target earning ceiling. He's flashed it on a per route basis that can compete for wide receiver 1 overall. And we saw last year that the Eagles at least intended early in the year to pass at an above average rate. And, then they go and get A.J. Brown. Maybe they want to get back to that. I think if in the event that we see the Eagles wanting to pass an above league average rate, and if A.J. Brown is able to stay healthy, then I think he's going to be a top 5 wide receiver, and he would be a guy that could compete for that wide receiver 1 chair.
Awesome. You're in good company. Ben Gretsch had a similar answer when we asked him that about 2 weeks ago. Okay. Tell everybody where they can find you, Jacob. This was awesome.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at FF_RTDB. And you can find my written work up on Player Profiler. I just had my last best ball article come out just at the end of last week. I'll have an article out soon previewing my in-season article, which is going to be focused a lot on streaming running backs, finding running backs off the waivers, picking running backs off your bench to start each week. It's going to be called Hitchhiker's Guide to Running Back. I'll be previewing that by probably about the end of this week. Then you can find me on the Full Tilt Dynasty podcast tonight. We are having Scott Barrett on to talk about bold predictions for the 2022 season. And then tomorrow I'll be on the Fantasy Alarm podcast. I'm going to be drafting in the FFPC Football Guys Challenge with Kevin Tompkins and Britt Flynn and Andrew Cooper. So lots of fun stuff going on. And thanks a lot for having me.
Awesome. Well, tune in later tonight. Dan Williamson, Jack Hahn, and Chris Eibel, 3 of the best auction players in the country for the high stakes realm, are going to have the auction show to end all auction shows. That's going off at 9:30. Thanks for tuning in, and definitely follow Jacob. Super, super sharp guy. We're glad this happened. Have a good day, everybody.